All right, guys. So whether you're going to choose business development or sales as your main channel for growth for your startup, both of them, I will say, have the same sales process. And so, either way, whether you do sales or business development, what you're going to see in this next section, you're still going to apply regardless of what you choose. And so basically, the sales and business development process is going to be the same. And how it's going to go down is in part one, what we're going to do is we're going to learn lead generation. And essentially, when you're at a company or a startup, there are going to be people who are sales development reps, also known as business development reps. And what their job to do is to send cold emails to generate leads. They could also cold call or use whatever form of lead generation that they can. But for the sake of this course and what has worked best in B2B startups that I've seen, sending cold emails is by far one of the most effective ways to generate meetings. So if you don't have a team and you are, a solo entrepreneur or you're just starting out as a founder, then you're going to basically have to do the entire stack. So in the beginning, it's all about lead generation, and that means sending an email to get that first meeting. So once you master the lead generation section, then your sales cycle is going to begin. And so at a typical startup, essentially the different roles that will take part in the sales cycle are the account executives, the business development reps, strategic partnerships, channel partnerships. So these are going to be the actual people who are talking to another company, trying to get that sale or trying to build that business relationship. And so essentially the goal is to build business relationship and close deals. And so, first lead generation section is to generate the meetings. And then the second part in the sales cycle, your goal is to get the meeting and then close the deal. And then the last part of the sales cycle is account management. And these are people who are going to be account managers, customer success reps. And their goal is to continue the relationship with the customer, to continue to upsell them on new products or make sure that they continue to buy from you. So for this course, what we're going to focus on is we're going to look at lead generation and sales. And the reason is because I know a lot of you guys are starting out and you're building your teams. And so the most important thing is, how do you get that first meeting, or how do you get the multiple meetings? And then how do you actually close a deal? And so we'll leave out, what to do after that. But, I want to make sure you guys figure out how you can close your own deals before you try to upsell anybody. What we're going to go into next is the sales cycle. So once you do actually get the meeting with the cold email, which we have a whole section about later in this course, I want to give you a high-level overview of what a typical sales cycle looks for a startup who is doing B2B sales or business development. So essentially, you want to generate a meeting with another company with a cold email first. And then what happens is, once you schedule a meeting, you will have a qualification call. And a qualification call, all you're essentially doing is you're qualifying that company to see whether or not it even makes sense to have another conversation. And if it does make sense to have another conversation, you'll transition that call to another call, which is called the discovery call. And in a discovery call, essentially you are discovering all of the pain points that a company has in depth and trying to see how you may be able to solve their solution. So the difference between a qualification call and a discovery call is that in a qualification call, you're just trying to see if it even makes sense to talk. It could be, it could be a 5-minute phone call, it could be a 10-minute phone call. And if it does make sense to talk, you would transition it into a discovery call, which startups usually take 30 minutes or an hour to really dive deep into that customer's pain so they could really figure out how to solve their problem. Once you do a discovery call, the next logical step is to do a presentation based on what you learned in the discovery call. And after the presentation, if it makes sense, you can actually just close the deal right there if your sales cycle is short. But a lot of times it may not be able to close right there if you have a longer sales cycle. And this is especially true when the customer wants to have follow-up calls, they want to negotiate the price and agreement terms with you, or they want to have implementation calls and how exactly they're going to use your software and integrate it with everything else that they have. And so after you finish those follow-up calls, then the deal will be closed. And so this is typically the sales cycle the majority of technology startups, especially in Silicon Valley, use to sell their products. And you could also use this for B2B sales where you're just doing direct sales, but it also works for business development, because if you think about it, the process is exactly the same. You send an email, you try to see if it makes sense to work with each other, you dive deep into their pain, you give them a presentation about what you got and how you can solve their pain, and then you do all the negotiations and follow-up calls, and then you close the deal. And once the deal is closed for a sales cycle, for direct sales, you're going to get the money right there, and then you implement your service. And if you're doing business development, you're going to get the deal right there. And then you're going to have that agreement where they're going to sell your product or service to their customers. And then you can expect to get your return on investment over time. And so now that you understand the sales cycles, here are the best practices when it comes to developing your sales and business development function of your business. If you're the founder, you must be able to sell your product or service before you hire anybody to sell it for you. And this is really important because a lot of founders, they may not be salespeople, they might be more technical, especially in the startup world, and they feel like they can just hire out and get someone else to sell their product. The truth is, if you can't sell it yourself, then you should not expect another person to sell it for you, even no matter how good they are in sales, because it might be that your product is unsellable. So you have to be able to sell it yourself before you hire anybody else to do it for you. Even if you're not the best in sales, you have to learn how to sell yourself. The second thing is when you're hiring SDRs, sales development reps or account executives, you want to make sure you hire 2 at a time. So this could be people who are going to be sending the cold emails, and it could be the people that are closing the deals. The reason why you want to hire 2 at a time is because if you hire 1 at a time, they may be successful, they may not be successful. And a lot of times when you hire the second person, let me give you an example of what typically happens. You might hire one person, they may be super, super successful. And then when you hire the second person, that person completely fails, and you're going to wonder, why did one person succeed and why one person fail? And you're not really sure, and it's hard to figure out. But if you hire 2 at a time and you're teaching them the same things and they're both performing really well, you can know that you're building a scalable machine because, if it works for 2 people and they both work hard and they obtain success, then you have something that could be replicable. But if you only hire 1 at a time, there's so many factors to why people succeed in sales, and that if you hire 1 at a time, you don't really know why one person succeeds and the other person doesn't. So by hiring 2, you increase the odds of understanding the why behind why people succeed, and then you'll be able to scale. And so when it comes to scaling, an important thing is you want to separate lead generation from the sales cycle, meaning you want to separate sending out those cold emails to generate meetings from actually taking the meeting and closing the deal. They're 2 very different functions that require different energies from the brain. And so if you try to do both at the same time, it's very, very difficult. And believe me, I had to do both at the same time. And it makes a lot more sense to have a whole team, all they do all day is generate leads, and another team, all they do all day is take meetings and close deals. And most startups do this because they understand that this is the most efficient way to split people's time. If you're just starting out as a founder or you're just starting out your startup, you want to focus heavily on lead generation. So this means you want to generate as many leads as possible, and you want to build a lead generation machine to get meetings every single month over day in and day out. And even when you have deals that begin in the sales cycle, you still want to focus on lead generation because you want to build as much pipeline as you can in the beginning, so you have a lot to work with, because not everybody is going to close. So again, if you're just starting out, focus heavily on lead generation and do not fret. I will show you how to generate leads with cold emails later in this course. That's everything we have to cover when it comes to best practices. So you learned, about the sales cycle, you learned about the best practices, and you learned how to structure your BD team or your sales team, no matter which strategy you go with. And now we are ready to move on to the next section.